So hi everyone, so I'm Charlie, I'm a technical lead. A few years ago I changed roles from being a programmer and became a technical lead, and today I want to talk a little bit about what that transition for me was like, and talk a little bit about what it is that technical leads actually do, because you might be surprised. It's really cool to be here. It's also to be able to talk to you about my work. A little bit about me that you need to know is I work at a co-development studio. We'll go a little bit more into that. I've had a real privilege. I've been working in the industry for about 10 years now, which is apparently a veteran, which makes me feel old, so that's not great. Out of interest, put your hand up if you've ever worked with a technical lead before. Curious to see. Okay. Put your hand up if you think you know what technical leads do. Okay, interesting. All right, let's try and get this started then. So there's a few kind of main things I want to cover. So I'll talk a little bit about who I am and how I got to where I am. I'll talk a little bit about how my career has changed the last kind of couple of years. I'll also talk about the things that I wish that I knew before I kind of went into this line of work. Specifically what I mean by that is transitioning from being an engineer into leadership, because it's a big change. And then hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll be able to answer the question, what do technical leads do? Because I'm still figuring that out quite a lot myself, as it turns out, for the last couple of years. A couple of disclaimers before we start. I am not here representing my company, so nothing I'm going to talk about is NDA or relating to them, other than occasional bit of trivia. I'm not going to be sharing anything that is private to any individuals or talking about anything in depth in terms of the work that we've done. Technical leadership is different in every organization. Everyone has their own ideas about what technical leadership is, so this is my view. And also I just want to mention that this is really talking about the non-technical aspects of my role. I'm not going to go into depth with technical stuff because I'll put you all to sleep and you'll never want to talk to me again. Okay, let's get started. So I'm a senior programmer at Wushu Studios. Wushu is a co-development company, so what that means is we don't make our own games. We work on other people's games. So essentially, we provide services. So if a company needs additional support to get that game out the door and get towards their release date, if they need art, if they need design, engineering, audio, writing, that's ironic, audio, writing, whatever, we supply that to them. And we've worked on a lot of very cool stuff. So most recently, we worked on the most recent Indiana Jones. We've worked on Baldur's Gate 3, Fall Guys, Forza Horizon, State of Decay. We've worked on a wide range of different things. I've been at Wushu for 3.5 years now. I was employee 83, and now we're 170, I think, or 175, something like that. We've rocketed in size. We're based in Liverpool, but we are primarily a remote studio. I don't have a statistic, but I think it's about 80% of us are fully remote, and the rest are in the office. Some people work hybrid. So while my title at Wushu is a senior programmer, my actual role is working as an acting lead. I've worked on a number of big projects now for the last couple of years. So I was a technical lead on Fall Guys Creative, which is the level editor for Fall Guys. I also was a technical lead on State of Decay 3, and I've also a technical lead on a new project, which actually changed probably about 8 weeks ago now, which I'm not allowed to talk about at the moment because it's under NDA, but hopefully soon. Okay, so the first thing to kind of say is that Wushu doesn't do leadership in a traditional way. I mentioned before that while my title is senior programmer, my acting role is different. The reason for this is because Wushu has a thing we call the armband system. The idea for this is that if someone wants to try leadership out, if they want to see if leadership is something that they would want to do, they can put on an armband, and for a project, they can become the lead. Typically what you'd do is you'd speak to your lead, or someone would approach you and say, hey, do you want to be lead for this project while we have this contract? And you say, yeah, absolutely, that sounds great. Or no way in hell, please no. Tends to be one of the two. So we try this because it means that people have, rather than two kind of traditional paths where from senior someone either becomes principal or they become a lead, you are principal, but you also are a lead. And if you decide that actually leadership is really not for me, it's not what I want to do anymore, you take the armband off and you return to being a programmer. And there's no consequence to that. Nothing changes. So getting into leadership was also not my original goal. If you'd have asked me 10 years ago if it was something I ever wanted to do, I would have said no. It kind of was a bit of a random change. The opportunity was actually offered to me when my lead at the time on the project I was working on changed projects. And essentially my boss approached me and said, I would like you to fill this role. Should be about 6 months, give or take, and then you'll be free to go back to being a programmer. And I said, sure, why not? Let's try it. See if this is for me. It's been 3 years now, and I'm still a lead now on my third project, so it seems to have kind of worked out. And I've been responsible for teams of lots of different sizes. I've been responsible for between 4 and 15 people, give or take, working with clients for companies who have hundreds of people and navigating all of that structure, which is a whole other kind of chaos. Okay. So leadership in a co-development environment is a little bit different. It's not what I would say first-party development leadership is like. When you're working on a client's project, you don't own the right to anything. We are external developers helping a client develop something, which means they have full control over everything, and I have no right to make decisions about anything other than the technical things I'm responsible for. So what I mean is that I am accountable to my team, my studios, and the responsibilities that I accept as part of that role, but I am also accountable to the client's products, the product itself, and the people playing the product, which means I have a lot of stakeholders and a lot of people I have to talk to understand what I have to do. And we have to do all of that while also making sure all the work we produce is up to our studio standard, because we have to maintain a good reputation, because if we don't produce good work, people won't pay us, and if people don't pay us, then we don't succeed with 170 people. Okay, so then part of being in a client-facing role and working on a project that we don't own means that I'm often subjected to sudden change, which means a lot of the time whatever I have planned or whatever I decide is the right path changes at the drop of a hat. At any given day I run around and the development plan is always changing all the time. Part of my role is also working with clients to understand their needs and their priorities and how those things might change. So this is risk mitigation. So for example, someone might say to me, hey Charlie, that thing is absolutely going to get done by that time, and I have to evaluate that actually what happens if this doesn't get done by this time, how does that affect us? It's a balancing act to maintain all of this, and it completely changes from project to project, because some clients work in completely different ways from others, which means that every single project is unique, and it means that every project has its own structure, its own way of working, its own stakeholders, its own processes, its own whole other culture that you have to learn and begin to navigate, and it's a really complicated environment. So when I stepped into technical leadership, I had to decide what kind of technical lead I actually wanted to be. It's tricky for me because I've worked in the industry for a while, and I've had some technical leads that I think, I would maybe say they weren't suited to the role. I think that's maybe the polite thing to say. Some of them maybe not very pleasant or easy to work with. And I decided that if I had the opportunity to be a technical lead and this was something that I was going to try, I wanted to lay out who I was going to be and what I imagined a good technical lead should be like for the people they're responsible for. So I wanted to mirror the core values of our company. Sounds very corporate, but Wushu is extremely people-focused. We are the most people-focused company I've ever worked for. We care a lot about everyone we work with, and we try and make sure our studio never crunches. It never does anything that destroys people's souls, because believe me, there's plenty of people in this industry who now are tired. The guys who formed Wushu, they have been in the games industry for over 30 to 40 years, depending on who they are. They've been around since its infancy. They've been around through the worst parts of it, and as a result, they have tried to build somewhere that is better and does not affect people in the same way they were affected when they were younger. Okay, so eventually I kind of settled on a couple of things. So if I was going to be a technical lead, I wanted to be approachable. I wanted to make sure that if something was wrong or if there's something to talk about, people would be able to come and talk to me. I wanted to be empathetic, and I wanted to be understanding of whatever someone was going through at the time. I understand that people have a life outside of work. I understand that this means that someone might not be day to day bringing their best into work every single day, and that's completely okay. I wanted to be honest and be able to have open conversations with everybody about the state of the project. I have a real hatred for people who feel the need to sugarcoat everything, even when it's bad or frustrating. I don't like this. I think it's a great way to destroy trust in your team if you pretend that anything difficult is not difficult. Instead, I try to be a bit more pragmatic around situations that, yes, this sucks, but we're going to find a plan and figure this out instead. Okay. I also wanted to be calm in the face of difficulty or frustration. Being a lead often means that you will experienced people being sometimes not very pleasant to you, all kinds of people, clients, people who are just having a really fucking bad day, all kinds of things. And as a result, you often have to just have a calm demeanor all the time. And if you don't, it upsets people and people will react to that. So it's something that I had to learn, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. I also wanted to be goal and results focused, and this sounds very corporate, doesn't it? What I mean by this is I have a hatred for process. I don't like putting people into boxes, is the way that I think of this. I think there is a habit of a lot of places. What am I doing? Yeah? Too close? Okay, sorry. If people are in their little boxes and they are told, you stay in this little box and this is what you do while you're on this project, it destroys creativity, it destroys the ability for people to have agency and ownership. Really sorry. I also really wanted to refuse toxic engineering culture. So if you've worked with engineers before at certain sizes of company, you have probably experienced this in the past. Engineers are pragmatic people and sometimes cannot be very polite. And I think there is a certain kind of standard that a lot of games industry sets for what engineering culture is supposed to be like, and I wanted to do the opposite. I did not want to encourage an environment where people would be belittled or people would be afraid to speak up as a result of being in an environment like that. Ooh, wrong one. So then I had to answer the question of what makes a good engineering culture. What did I want to try and build? Well, I'm a big believer in radical candor. Anyone know what that means? So radical candor is the belief that if you see a problem, you say the problem. It means complete honesty and transparency at any given time. So if something is wrong, if a process isn't working, if something is frustrating you, you talk about it. There's actually a great book, Radical Candor, that I was introduced to by a producer I used to work with. I wanted to have the ability to get on with your work without distraction. If there is something happening in the company that's going to be frustrating you or distracting you, I will take that distraction away from you so you can focus on your work. I wanted a fair workload to make sure that everyone I was working with understood that they had trust and agency from me. They could get on with the work they needed to do and not be distracted. They were orientated towards goals, which meant that everyone knew roughly what we were trying to achieve. Everyone had an understanding of our long-term and short-term goals of what we wanted to do. I think this is very important. There was good communication as well to make sure that at any given time, if there were problems or something happening in the company, we would talk openly about it and not try to hide it. I also am a big believer in no blame. I think there's a lot of cultures I've worked with where they have a very blame-orientated culture where when something goes wrong, they like to point fingers. This is useless. Blame is a pointless game is the stupid rhyme for it, but it also is true. I think if you blame people for making mistakes, what happens is you start to develop a culture where people will not admit to making mistakes. If you feel that making a mistake means that you will be blamed and pointed out and laughed at, or whatever the result of it is, you will hide those mistakes. And if you hide those mistakes and you don't talk openly about those mistakes, that leads to all kinds of problems later on. So you have to have a no-blame culture, because otherwise people will hide things. They will not point out problems. There will be no radical candor, which is a problem. Ego is also a problem when you're working with engineers, historically, in my experience. And I'm a big believer in working completely egoless. If I write code that's bad, tell me that the code I've written is bad. If you have written bad code, I will tell you, not admittedly in the way of saying your code is bad, but we'll have a conversation about improving it. And it is not about you as an individual, it is about the product, it is about what we are trying to build. And finally, I'm a big believer in everyone on the team being supportive of each other. Mistakes happen, so regardless if you're a junior programmer or a principal or 40 years of experience or 10 years of experience or 1 year of experience, pointing fingers doesn't help. And it makes people want to hide their mistakes, it makes people toxic, it makes people all focus on their individual tasks and not wanting to help each other. And if you are not helping each other and not progressing towards the goals you're supposed to be progressing towards, you don't meet your targets. You don't do what you have to be able to do, the product doesn't get out, we fail. So I think the easiest way to kind of describe to you what the transition has been like is to tell you what I did before. This was a kind of very rough view of what being a programmer is like. I spend 6 out of my 8 hours in a workday at building and engineering, 2 hours being distracted by meetings and whatever else. Being a lead is more like this. Every single day is completely different. So basically, in comparison to being a programmer, I am fighting for time and balancing priorities every single day. My day-to-day focus has changed, so instead of focusing on the implementation of a small number of problems, I have a high-level view of many problems, many different things, many different people. This ranges from technical issues to team process, logistics, admin, code review, implementation, technical documentation, stakeholders, fires, mentoring, conducting one-to-ones, admin, all kinds of stuff. My day is never really the same back to back. Everything changes all the time. Which is why it is that anytime anyone asks me what technical leads do, I laugh, because I honestly, it's hard to tell you. My day changes so much all the time. So this was a big change, because I had no experience doing most of the things that were in this list. This was all new to me when I transitioned into this role. It was all I had to discover, and to be honest, nothing that anyone does can prepare you for that transition. You can read all the books you want, you can have meetings with the people who've done it before. It doesn't prepare you for the big shift and change if you've been doing something for a long time. So I'm going to move on now to talking about the things that I wish that I knew, the things that I wish I'd known ahead of time. It took me a long time to start to let go. Specifically what I mean by this is, now that my priorities had changed day to day, I had a really hard time letting go of the implementation. I'd spent the last 7 years of my career at the point I changed in doing day-to-day writing code and writing implementation, code reviews, focusing on those little details. And instead I'd moved into essentially a management position, maintaining 15 people, and I couldn't let go of the things that I was comfortable with or the things that I knew. And as a result, I became the opposite of what I was supposed to do, because rather than helping the team, I became a blocker. Because I was so busy focusing on the implementation, so busy focusing on the things I was comfortable with and the things I knew, that I wasn't doing the responsibilities that lead was supposed to do. And that was my awakening, I guess, in realizing that I had to let go, and I had to let go of the details and let people do their jobs, which was actually very hard for me at the beginning. I wasn't built for that. Now what I try to do is I try and carve out 2 hours each day to do some engineering. My reasoning for this is because this is a very slippery slope. If you completely let go and you don't have any idea what's going on, things get out of control. If you are too involved and you can't do your other responsibilities, then you are also out of control. So it is always a balance. So I try and block out 2 hours a day now, roughly, in my calendar. Otherwise, the time gets taken by something else. Something else that I got wrong at the beginning. There is a very different thing between listening to what someone is saying and understanding what someone is saying. Is anyone here familiar with the term active listening? A couple of people, that's great. Okay, cool. So when I'm talking about active listening, what I'm talking about is, well, I'm talking about a couple of things. What I'm going to talk about first is distraction. Excuse me. So if you're a lead, at any given time, you're probably receiving, I think I get something like 300 Slack messages a day, between 300 and 500 in a given day that I have to reply to. And if you are sitting in a meeting and you see in the corner of your eye that message counter just counting up the whole time, it's very difficult to pay attention to what someone is saying because you can't focus. And if you're not there in the conversation, if you're not paying attention to what someone is saying, if you're not present in the moment, that is not good. It is not a good thing. One-to-ones are supposed to be their time with you to talk about anything that concerns them. And if someone can tell that you're not paying attention and you're distracted, they will feel devalued by you. They will feel that if you are not paying attention to them and you're paying attention to something else in the background, they are not as important to you as the thing that's going on. And as a result, you end up building people who think, well, what was the point in that meeting? It wasn't worth my time. If I've tried to raise these things to you and you've not listened to what I've had to say, and then whatever I tried to warn you about went wrong, why would I bother telling you again? And that situation happens all the time. So when I'm talking about an active listening, is I'm talking about not just listening to what someone is saying, but putting all the distractions away and trying to understand what it is that they're saying. Asking questions about what they're saying, taking an interest in what they're saying, trying to not just think about the words coming out of their mouth, but what it is that they're actually trying to tell you. And this is not an easy thing to do if you suffer from any kind of attention deficit disorder, or if you just generally are someone who gets very easily distracted. I had a big distraction with this at the beginning, and I actually had to have a conversation with someone where they called me out for it. where they said to me, I can tell you're not focusing, and I was like, I'm sorry, I can see in the background that something's happening and I have to go and deal with it, but it's awful for that person, because if they have a dedicated slot to talk to you and you don't value that with them, they don't feel valued by you. That's not good. So generally with one-to-ones, what I try to find is avoiding distractions. So I mute Slack during the call, so I can't see the counter going up and I don't hear any Slack notifications. I've changed all of my 30-minute slots to 25 minutes. So at the end of every meeting, I have 5 minutes to make notes about that meeting, to finish my thoughts about that meeting, write it down, and that way I'm not thinking about it for the next one. I take notes when people are talking to me, so I'm sure I'm maintaining focus and I know what they're saying. And I try to ask and make an effort to ask questions about what they're telling me. If someone's telling me that something at work made them feel a particular way, or they have concerns about something at work, I try to follow up with questions about it. Tell me about more specifics about that information. Tell me about what it is that's going on. What do you think we can do about it? And making an effort in that with that person builds trust and rapport. So it's interesting because one-to-ones are very valuable. I've worked with engineers who really hate one-to-ones. I tend to find the engineers who hate one-to-ones tend to be the principals or the people who've been doing this for a very long time, and they find the idea of one-to-ones just to be a waste of their time. And typically those people will just call out to me whenever they see a problem, so it's not an issue. But with juniors or people I mentor frequently, one-to-ones are key, and we meet once or twice a week where we talk about their progress, we monitor what they're doing, and it's extremely important. So one-to-one is not just about having time to talk to someone, it's training, it's building skills, it's reviewing their work, it's a 30-minute chat with someone who's maybe just having a crap day, who just wants to talk to you about whatever's going on. And this is important. Something else I got wrong at the beginning of this journey was consistent feedback. I was happy as Larry telling everyone about everything I thought was going well. I was very happy to praise you if you were doing a good job. I sucked at giving you critical feedback if something was going wrong. I really struggled with it because I felt when I was giving negative feedback to people that I was letting them down. And it took me a while to figure out that actually this is not a very good way to think. So I really struggled with this. I eventually kind of found different ways of doing it. And there's a lot of advice out there about how to give constructive feedback, and a lot of it is great for very particular situations and working with very particular people. However, engineers generally I found just prefer being quite direct. They like you being direct for the most part. Some people not so much, but you talk to that person, you ask them about how they prefer to receive feedback. Do you want me to be direct about it? Do you want me to quote it? Do you want me to figure out the right way to talk to you about it? And you work with that person on different ways of giving feedback to figure out what the right way is. So my general rule for feedback now is to feedback often and keep it consistent and helpful. If I can't come up with a helpful suggestion on the way to improve something, I'm probably not going to raise it until I can. If something is wrong and someone's performance is not where it needs to be, or there's a concern from someone about someone's health or whatever it is, then obviously that breaks that rule. But for the most part, I try and make sure that if I'm giving you feedback, it is not just negative. There is something, some kind of outcome or some kind of goal coming out of that for you to pursue. Otherwise, it's just telling someone they're not doing a good job, which is fuck all useless, frankly. Then part of what we're trying to avoid with this is surprise feedback and appraisals. You might have been in this situation before when you go into an appraisal and then someone mentions something to you that happened 3 or 4 months ago, and they say, oh, by the way, what about when you were an asshole to this person 4 months ago? And you say, why didn't you tell me about it then? And they didn't, because someone said, oh, we'll wait till the appraisal. This sucks. It is so incredibly useless. If something comes up to you in an appraisal that you didn't know about, something in the feedback loop has gone wrong. Somewhere a lead has dropped the ball, somewhere a conversation has not happened where it was supposed to, and this is not good. So something else I got right was keeping the team focused. Everyone I worked with understood what was expected of them. They understood what the goals were. The short-term goals, the long-term goals, they knew what I was hoping for, they knew what we were all aiming towards, and they could self-direct from that information. I think the best teams I've ever worked with are not linked by individual tasks, they are linked by common goals. If everyone understands what we are aiming towards, then they are usually completely able to self-direct with very little direction from me. Occasionally I might step in if there's a priority that I think needs to happen or has to change. For the most part, they self-manage. Unfortunately, part of this industry is that development is always changing. Goals are always changing. Games are living software, iteration loops. We try things, we figure out they work, or they figure out we don't work. development plan is changing all the time, every moment of every day. It's the reality of it. But to be able to overcome that, you have to have a solid team who can sit together and figure out what it is that we have to do to get to where we need to be now that the plan has changed. And if you don't have that, that's a problem. This is also significantly easier to do with a small team. I had a much easier time doing this with 5 people than I did with 12. 2 separate teams for 2 different projects. Communication is a problem in the games industry. If you've ever worked in a big company, one of the clients we worked with, I think, total, it was something like 350 people altogether that we had to communicate with at any given time. And when we were working with that many people, communication was a struggle. But the consequence of poor communication is high, because if people don't understand what they're doing, what your goals are, how the roadmap has changed, your team falls apart. Okay, so something else that I think is really important is trust and relationships. So in my time in the industry, I've had some instances, I'm sure other people have suffered from this too, where either my trust or faith in a particular individual has been invalidated. I've spoken with someone, told them something about the way I was feeling, or told them something about the project we were working on, and they used that information in a way they shouldn't have. I have a personal hatred for this. I think it's extremely important that we maintain privacy at all aspects, but also if someone raises a concern to me, I think it's very important that we do something about it. If someone comes to me and says, this process is bad, this solution that we've written for this is bad, and we have to change it, and if I do nothing, and then that becomes a problem, that person feels devalued because they feel they were ignored. So something has to happen. Okay, relationship building is also very important in the world of co-dev. The client, whoever they are, they're trusting us with probably hundreds of millions of pounds in development. They have this product that's out. If they don't meet their deadlines, people lose interest. People don't play it, they suffer. It means that there has to be mutual trust between us and them for us to hit the goals that we have to be able to hit. And if we don't have that trust, if we don't have that mutual respect between us, it's going to be a problem. Trust gets built with consistency, reliability, honesty, and results. If I tell a client or if I tell someone on my team, I'm going to make sure this thing happens, and it doesn't happen, false promises are extremely dangerous because people lose faith that the next time you say it will actually happen. And if the cause of a big client where they're potentially paying a lot of money for results, that's dangerous, especially if you're saying it without really being able to back it up. So I think something that I got right and something that I'm most proud of in the time that I've been doing this role is mentoring and growth. It is the most important thing to me in the time that I've been doing this. So one-to-ones with some newer programmers, providing direction, code reviews, pair programming, iterating with them to understand the problem domain. There is no greater highlight in my time as a lead than seeing some of the graduates I've worked with develop. So 2 years ago, I hired 2 graduates, both of whom are now mid-levels, and they have been absolutely brilliant. And watching them flourish and change in the last 2 years has been just incredible. They take on really difficult problems, they do an amazing job, they have incredible value in everything they do. I'm really proud of them all the time. And it's something else to be able to have that impact, and it's something that a leadership role brings you, is the chance to be able to transform that, be able to talk with someone and figure out what isn't working, and work with them on figuring out what the right thing is. I have a particular memory where I was having a very rough working week. Nothing seemed to be working the way I wanted it to. I was stressed, I was fed up, I was very frustrated at the situations all the time. And someone I'd been working with and been mentoring said to me, I just want you to know that I really appreciate all the help that you've given me. And in that moment, I still think of this memory, in that moment it felt that all the frustration and all the anger and negative feelings had been worth all of that effort. Because I realized that in my role I have the ability and impact to help people. I have the ability to make things easier for you, to help you learn, to help you grow. And that's absolutely worth it. So something else I had to learn was that everyone works completely differently. Every programmer I work with has unique strengths and weaknesses. You can't really compare 2 people. I think it's very dangerous to compare 2 people. If you set 2 people off at the exact same time and say they do the exact same amount of studying, the exact same routine, they're not going to come out exactly the same. It's not the reality. Everyone is different. Everyone learns differently and thinks differently. If someone is neurodiverse or has ADHD or anxiety, that may impact the way that they work and the way that they think. So you have to learn to work with them individually. You have to find ways of balancing problems ways of working with them, to explain problems to them. And this is really important if you want to grow with your team. Something else that might change, when you step into a leadership role, you might find that some of your current relationships will change. So when you step into that role, you now represent the organization. It's a weird situation because on one hand, from the organization's perspective, I represent the team. From the team's perspective, I represent the organization, which means I get stuck in between two worlds. It also means that people who might have been a bit more friendly with you or a bit more open with you will stop being that way, because they are more afraid about telling you things in case it negatively impacts their career. A lot of this will tie into past experiences. So if someone's had a really bad negative relationship with leadership before, they will not openly talk to you about the negative things going on because they've been burned. All of this also ties into one-to-ones and appraisals. And something else that is difficult about all of this is conflict and frustration. So conflict is natural, it happens. The games industry is full of really passionate people, and everyone has their own ideas about the right way to go about solving a problem, or the right way to design something, or the right way to build something, or whatever. I think when I say conflict, a lot of people think that I'm thinking of two people yelling at each other across the boardroom, throwing things and cursing at each other. That's not what I mean. Conflict comes in all shapes and sizes. Different people can have conflict in a meeting, and they can talk in perfectly calm, reasonable voices with calm demeanors. I don't necessarily mean it in an angry way, but part of my role is listening to what everyone has to say and navigating conflict and help people decide what the outcome is going to be despite that. So in my experience, I find that conflict often comes from people who are frustrated. It comes from people who feel they've been ignored. It comes from people who've had previous bad experiences. If you fixed the problem before, just like the problem we're trying to fix now, and I don't take on board the things that you're saying, you're negatively going to get frustrated because you feel you're being ignored. It's perfectly natural. Part of this is also about picking your battles. There are times where someone might really just rub you the wrong way, or something might just happen, and you have to realize that there are the right and wrong times to bring those things up. Certain spaces where you should not raise those concerns, and certain spaces where you should. I think being in this position means that you should really try not to get frustrated. So I can deal with situations where someone might be yelling at me because maybe a promotion didn't work out, or maybe someone got really frustrated at work, or they just had a really bad day, or they're not very well, or whatever the reasoning is, they're just very unhappy and it creates conflict. And I learned this from a technical lead that I work with who had to navigate some really difficult situations in the time that he's been doing this role, which is a lot longer than me. And I was in a situation once where we were in a meeting and a client was very unhappy with him and was talking with him about it. And the entire time where they were frustrated and annoyed about the situation, he was completely calm. Didn't faze him in the slightest, completely calm, completely reasonable, and he just shut all of that negativity down with just pure kindness and empathy of listening to what they had to say, nodding along, understanding the problem and finding a solution. And I really wanted to learn to do that. It's something that I think doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. But the ability to be able to take that frustration and turn it into something positive is a rare talent, I think. So something I had to learn as well is not knowing all the answers. So when I was asked to move into this role, one of the initial concerns was that I didn't feel I was ready. Any technical lead I'd ever worked with, anytime I ever asked them a question about something, hey, how do we fix this problem? They would have an answer prepared for me, and they would tell me. And I didn't feel that when I was going to step into this role that I was going to be ready to be that person. I didn't feel I'd had enough time in this industry to know how to do that. But as it turns out, every technical lead I know and have met since then is basically just making a best guess. A lot of the time we don't know. A lot of the time we have to make assumptions from the information we have available to us, which is also tends to be either incorrect or wrong to some degree, whether or not that's due to time estimates or whatever the problem is. After a while, you start to pick up on that. And when you start to work with it a lot, you start to get more and more information about the kind of questions people might ask. You learn to pick up patterns. You learn to figure out how to answer those questions. But it's intimidating at the beginning when you're thrown into this situation where you might not know the answer to all these questions people are asking. And you might feel that you're letting people down by not knowing. So something I had to learn as well is what you say really matters. This is especially true of being a lead. I think it matters for everyone. I think if you make a joke and it doesn't land, regardless of who you are, you have the ability to upset people in a lot of different ways. But as a lead, what you say really matters. I've worked with leads who used to joke about people being fired, and he thought it was very funny. I personally do not find that very funny, because some people who are maybe a bit more anxious in nature will read into that in a particular way. The other problem is that if you are a lead and you have people more junior than you, they will be looking to you for the way that you behave and will mirror what you do. Those people will look to the way that you treat other people. They will look to the way that you work with other disciplines. And if they see you be rude to those disciplines, they will copy that behavior. And I have seen this working in this industry. I have seen junior programmers copy the behavior of seniors and leads for things that they should not have been doing. And once those habits are created, it's extremely difficult to break them. It's also a very difficult thing to pull someone aside and say, you can't do that. And I know that you saw this person doing it, but he can't do it either. It's a difficult conversation to have, and yet it happens. So when you're in this position, you really have to think about what you say. You have to think about how it can be interpreted. You have to think about the consequence of what happens if somebody misinterprets that. So now I'm hoping that I can answer this question. So what do technical leads do? So I keep the team moving. I keep them moving in the right direction. I keep them focused on their goals. I mentor, I provide feedback to everyone on the team and help the team members grow professionally by assigning them goals for their individual growth and help them in achieving them. We review codes, we provide feedback on the implementation from a higher level perspective. We pair program, we rubber duck with our team members to help them solve difficult problems. We develop and build roadmaps, figuring out the goals for the next few weeks and even up to the next year. We work with the client, the company, production, design, all kinds of disciplines and departments to make sure that everyone has everything that they need. We check in with people on one-to-ones. We make sure everyone's okay. We make sure that everyone has everything that they need and that they're doing okay at work. We balance the needs of the project, the client, the company to make sure that we're setting reasonable targets and that all of that can be accomplished in time. And with plenty of room for error through risk analysis to make sure that we never have to crunch. If we miss a deadline or something happens, then we need to make sure that we have a plan for what we'll do to get back on track. We communicate with stakeholders across companies and disciplines to translate technical jargon. So I spent a lot of my time in my previous project working with lots of people across lots of disciplines, lots of them non-technical. So trying to take technical problems that were extremely difficult and translate them into easily understandable English to people who didn't have a concept of it is a time-consuming thing. It's also something that is very important so everyone understands what it is that the problems that we're facing and it doesn't trivialize them. We communicate with stakeholders, talked about that. We assess production pipelines, features, and scope to watch for risk. A lot of my job is about watching for risk and making sure that we offset it in any way that we can. But I think the most important thing that I do is the team health, morale, and culture. My first and primary role is always making sure that everyone on the team is okay. Everyone has what they need. Everyone is able to do their job. Everyone understands what's expected of them. Okay. So hopefully that answers that question for you. That's what technical leads do. If you want to have a little ramble, tell me what you think, find me on LinkedIn. I'm right there. Otherwise, thank you.